Hello, welcome to Know About History channel. Hope you like it.
The winter of 1943 in the desolate, mountainous terrain of central Tunisia served as the setting for one of the most humiliating defeats in the history of the United States Army. Yet it simultaneously provided the catalyst for a transformation that would eventually shatter the myth of German invincibility. To understand how the Americans proved Erwin Rommel wrong after the Battle of Kasserine Pass, one must first examine the depths of the failure that occurred in February of that year. The American II Corps, under the command of Major General Lloyd Fredendall, entered the North African campaign as a «green» force, largely untested in the complexities of modern combined arms warfare. They were characterized by a dangerous mixture of overconfidence and tactical naivety. This was a force that had seen success during the amphibious landings of Operation Torch, but those successes had come against Vichy French forces who were often ambivalent about the fight. When they finally collided with the battle-hardened veterans of the Deutsches Afrikakorps and the 5th Panzer Army, the result was a catastrophe that sent shockwaves through the Allied High Command. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, viewed the American performance at Kasserine Pass with a mixture of professional disdain and strategic relief. In his diaries and reports to Berlin, Rommel described the American soldiers as physically soft, tactically inept, and lacking the fighting spirit necessary to endure the rigors of high-intensity combat. He famously remarked that while the Americans had excellent equipment, they lacked the leadership and the instinct for war that defined the German soldier. He believed the Americans were amateurs who could be easily bullied by aggressive, mobile maneuvers. This assessment was not entirely unfounded based on the evidence of February 19, 1943. At Kasserine, the Americans had suffered from a fragmented command structure, poor use of terrain, and a complete lack of coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery. Fredendall, who rarely visited the front and commanded from a deep underground bunker miles behind the lines, had dispersed his units into penny packets, making them easy targets for concentrated German panzer thrusts. American armor, specifically the M3 Lee and the early M4 Shermans, were outmaneuvered by German tactical superiority, and American infantry were often abandoned on isolated hilltops, jebels, without support. The panic that ensued during the retreat from the pass was so severe that it became known as the Kasserine Races, as disorganized troops fled westward, abandoning vast quantities of equipment. However, Rommel's mistake was in assuming that this initial failure was a permanent trait of the American character rather than a temporary consequence of inexperience. The process of proving Rommel wrong began with a brutal and honest self-assessment by the American leadership, spearheaded by General Dwight D. Eisenhower. The first and most decisive step was the removal of Lloyd Fredendall and his replacement with Major General George S. Patton, Jr. This change in leadership was the secret that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the American Army in North Africa. Patton arrived at 2nd Corps headquarters in Jebel al-Kifain like a whirlwind, instantly demanding a level of discipline and professional standards that the troops had previously lacked. He famously insisted on the wearing of neckties and leggings even in the heat of the desert, and he issued heavy fines for soldiers who did not wear their steel helmets. While these measures seemed superficial to some, they were part of a psychological campaign to instill a sense of urgency, pride, and order. Patton understood that the Americans were not suffering from a lack of bravery, but from a lack of focus and aggression. He sought to replace the Kasserine mentality of passive defense with a doctrine of violent, relentless offense. He retooled the training programs, emphasizing the importance of moving and firing, and the absolute necessity of aggressive leadership at the platoon and company levels. Under Patton and his deputy Omar Bradley, the American II Corps underwent a metamorphosis. They began to consolidate their armor into larger, more lethal formations rather than scattering them. They also addressed the catastrophic failure of air-ground coordination. In the weeks after Kasserine, the Allies reorganized their air power into the Northwest African Air Forces, creating a system where tactical air support was directed by ground controllers, ensuring that the Luftwaffe no longer had a free hand over the battlefield. Perhaps the most significant technical and tactical achievement that proved Rommel wrong was the American mastery of artillery. The U.S. Army had long prided itself on its artillery tradition, but it was in the wake of Kasserine that this arm of the service truly came into its own. The Americans developed a system known as time on target, TOT. This required incredible coordination and precision, Multiple artillery batteries, often located miles apart, would calculate their firing times so that their shells would all impact a single target at the exact same second. This created a sudden, overwhelming firestorm that gave the enemy no time to seek cover. When Rommel's panzers attempted to maneuver against American lines in the subsequent weeks, they were met not by fleeing infantry, but by a wall of steel and high explosives that was more accurate and more devastating than anything the Germans had encountered. The amateur Americans had created a logistical and mathematical system of destruction that neutralized the German advantage in tactical maneuver. Rommel's diaries began to reflect a shifting tone, noting that the American artillery was unbelievably heavy and perfectly directed. This was the first crack in the Desert Fox's confidence. The tactical rebuttal continued at the Battle of El Ghouter in late March 1943. Here, the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, stood their ground against a determined assault by the 10th Panzer Division. Unlike at Kasserine, the American infantry remained in their foxholes, utilizing their M1 Garand rifles and Browning machine guns to devastating effect against the German grenadier, while American tank destroyers, such as the M10, engaged the panzers from concealed positions. The American soldiers proved they were no longer soft. They endured hours of pounding and returned fire with a grim efficiency that shocked their German counterparts. When the German armor tried to break through the American lines, they were caught in a crossfire of anti-tank guns and the aforementioned taut artillery strikes. The 10th Panzer Division was forced to retreat, having suffered significant losses. This was the first time an American unit had defeated a veteran German Panzer Division in a head-on engagement. The news of El Ghouter rippled through the Axis command. The Americans were learning, and they were learning fast. Rommel, who by this point had been recalled to Germany for health reasons but remained in close contact with the front, had to confront the reality that his earlier assessment had been a catastrophic miscalculation. The Americans were not just men with machines, they were becoming a professional, lethal force. Another crucial detail in this transformation was the American logistical superiority. While Rommel was constantly starved for fuel, ammunition, and spare parts, a situation exacerbated by the Allied dominance of the Mediterranean sea lanes, the Americans were being supplied by the arsenal of democracy. However, the achievement wasn't just in having the supplies, but in the American ability to move them. The U.S. Army's trucking and maintenance units proved to be more efficient than the German horse-drawn and rail-dependent logistics. American units were able to remain in the field longer, repair their tanks faster, and reposition themselves with a speed that the Axis could not match. This mobility allowed the Second Corps to shift its weight across the Tunisian front with surprising agility. The speed of the American recovery after Kasserine was a logistical miracle that Rommel had deemed impossible. By the time of the final Allied offensive toward Tunis and Bizerte, the Americans were operating with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, the very trait Rommel had once mocked. The Battle of Hill 609 in late April and early May 1943 served as the final, definitive proof of American maturity. Hill 609 was a formidable natural fortress, a massive limestone plateau that dominated the approach to the city of Mettur. It was held by elite German paratroopers and mountain troops who believed the position was impregnable. The task of taking it fell to the 34th Infantry Division, the Red Bull, a National Guard unit that had performed poorly in the early stages of the campaign. Under the guidance of Omar Bradley, who had taken over Second Corps as Patton moved to plan the invasion of Sicily, the 34th Division executed a textbook infantry armor artillery assault. They used their artillery to smoke the German observers, moved their tanks up the steep slopes to provide direct fire support, a maneuver the Germans thought impossible, and then cleared the bunkers with grenades and bayonets. The capture of Hill 609 broke the back of the German defensive line in northern Tunisia. It proved that American infantry could take the most difficult terrain from the best troops the Wehrmacht had to offer. The German soldiers who were captured at Hill 609 expressed shock at the tenacity and the ruthless efficiency of the American attack. They were no longer fighting the panicked boys of Kasserine, they were fighting a modern, industrial army that had mastered the art of war. The final collapse of the Axis forces in North Africa in May 1943 saw nearly 250,000 German and Italian soldiers surrender. This was a defeat on the scale of Stalingrad, and a significant portion of the credit belonged to the American II Corps. The Americans had entered the campaign as a liability and ended it as a premier fighting force. Rommel's initial assessment had been proven wrong in every category: leadership, discipline, tactical skill, and fighting spirit. The Americans had shown a unique capacity for learning under fire, a trait that would define their performance for the rest of the war. They took the lessons of Kasserine Pass, the pain, the embarrassment, and the blood, and used them to forge a military machine that was superior to the German model because it combined individual initiative with overwhelming industrial and logistical power. The secrets of the Kasserine recovery lay in the American willingness to fire incompetent commanders, to adapt their technology to the reality of the battlefield, and to instill a culture of aggressive, combined arms coordination. When one analyzes the details of the post-Kasserine period, the role of the American GI also undergoes a transformation. The soldiers of the 1st, 9th, and 34th Infantry Divisions, and the 1st and 2nd Armored Divisions, developed a hard-bitten, pragmatic professionalism. They learned the tricks of the German army, the use of S-mines, the overlapping fields of fire of the MG-42, and the tactical use of the 88 dual-purpose gun, and they developed countermeasures. They learned to respect the German soldier without fearing him. This psychological shift was essential. Rommel had banked on the Americans being brittle, believing that a sharp blow would cause them to shatter. Instead, the blow at Kasserine had acted like a hammer on steel, tempering the American army and making it stronger. The secrets from the Battle of Midway, regarding the loss of carriers, and the secrets of the Blitzkrieg, regarding speed, all find a parallel here in North Africa. Victory is not just about the first strike, it is about the ability to absorb a blow and return it with greater force. The transformation of the American army in Tunisia also had profound implications for the subsequent campaigns in Sicily, Italy, and eventually Normandy. The officers who were blooded in the wadis and jebels of North Africa, men like Eisenhower, Bradley, Patton, and thousands of company-grade officers, became the backbone of the Allied effort. They carried with them the hard-won knowledge that firepower must be concentrated, that logistics is the lifeblood of maneuver, and that leadership must be present at the front. The amateurs of February 1943 had become the professionals of May 1943. Rommel, in his later life, would reflect on the American soldier with much greater respect, eventually recognizing that the industrial might of the United States, when coupled with the rapidly evolving skill of its soldiers, was an unstoppable force. But by the time the Desert Fox reached this conclusion, his Afrika Korps was gone, and the path to the heart of the Reich was being paved by the very men he had once dismissed. The historical data confirms that after Kasserine, the American casualty rates in engagement with German forces began to drop, while their kill ratios improved significantly. This was not due to a change in equipment, the Sherman tank remained largely the same, but due to a change in how that equipment was used. The integration of the Grasshopper light observation planes for artillery spotting, the improved radio communication between tanks and infantry, and the aggressive use of mortar fire to suppress German machine gun nests all contributed to this shift. The Americans proved that their greatest strength was not their softness, but their flexibility. While the German system was often rigid and hampered by a top-down command structure that stifled initiative when things went wrong, the American system, after Patton, encouraged a can-do attitude that empowered lower-level commanders to solve problems on the ground. This was the human speed that Rommel had failed to account for. In the final analysis, the story of how Americans proved Rommel wrong after Kasserine Pass is a story of a nation's military coming of age. It serves as a reminder that initial failure is often the most effective teacher. The Desert Fox was a master of the tactical move, but he underestimated the operational and strategic resilience of the American people. He saw the snapshot of a confused retreat in a mountain pass and mistook it for the feature film of the American war effort. The reality was that Kasserine Pass was the last time the U.S. Army would ever be truly green. From that point forward, they were a force that understood the cost of victory and the price of failure. The hills of Tunisia, once the site of American shame, became the proving ground for the army that would eventually liberate a continent. The silence of the abandoned German and Italian equipment littering the road to Tunis was the final, wordless rebuttal to Rommel's arrogance. The amateurs had won the game, and they had done so by playing it better, faster, and more ruthlessly than the professionals. This deep dive into the historical details of the Tunisian campaign reveals a pattern of systematic improvement that is often overlooked in favor of more dramatic narratives. The secrets were not in a single miracle weapon, but in the thousands of small adjustments made by mechanics, radio operators, supply clerks, and infantrymen. It was the realization that a necktie could lead to discipline, that a radio could lead to an airstrike, and that a single shell, timed to the second, could break a panzer attack. This was the true nature of the American achievement. Rommel was wrong because he didn't realize that the Americans were not just fighting a war, they were engineering a victory. They applied the principles of industrial efficiency to the chaos of the battlefield, creating a system that could absorb mistakes, learn from them, and then crush the opponent with the weight of that knowledge. The legacy of Kasserine Pass is not the defeat itself, but the spectacular, relentless, and undeniably successful recovery that followed. This is how the American II Corps proved to the world, and to Erwin Rommel himself, that they were a force to be reckoned with, a force that would not stop until the final surrender was signed. The journey from the panic of Kasserine to the triumph of Tunis is one of the most remarkable chapters in military history, a testament to the power of leadership, the resilience of the common soldier, and the terrifying effectiveness of a democracy fully awakened to the demands of total war. The specific dynamics of the Patton-Bradley partnership during this period also deserve scrutiny. While Patton provided the fire and the visible transformation of the troops' morale, Omar Bradley provided the quiet competence and the attention to detail that ensured the maneuvers actually worked. Bradley's focus on Hill 609 and the logistical needs of the 34th Division showed a commander who was in tune with the capabilities of his men. Together, they formed a command team that Rommel's successors, such as von Arnim, found impossible to counter. The Germans were used to fighting a linear war of maneuvers. The Americans introduced a multi-dimensional war of attrition, logistics, and precision firepower. The secrets of the Kasserine Pass are thus revealed to be the secrets of American organizational genius. The ability to take a diverse group of National Guardsmen and draftees and turn them into a cohesive fighting unit in a matter of weeks is a feat that has few parallels. Furthermore, the American use of technology, specifically the 2.36-inch bazooka, began to appear in larger numbers after Kasserine. While initially prone to malfunctions, the bazooka gave the American infantrymen a portable, lethal counter to German armor for the first time. This changed the psychology of the tank panic that Rommel had exploited at Kasserine. When a German panzer commander realized that every hedgerow or foxhole could contain a weapon capable of punching through his armor, his own aggression was curtailed. This democratization of anti-tank power was another factor that proved Rommel's theory of American softness wrong. The American soldier was willing to crawl close to a Tiger tank to deliver a killing blow, a level of bravery that the Germans had previously thought was their exclusive domain. In conclusion, the American victory in North Africa was a victory of the system over the legend. Rommel was a legend, but the U.S. Army was a system. Legends can be defeated by reality, and the reality of American power was something Rommel simply could not comprehend in the early days of 1943. By the time he realized his mistake, the amateurs had already taken his mountain passes, destroyed his tanks, and captured his armies. The story of the post-Kasserine recovery is the story of how the United States Army became the most powerful military force in the world, not by being perfect from the start, but by being the best at fixing its mistakes. The echoes of this transformation can be felt in every American military operation since, a legacy of resilience and adaptation that was born in the dust and blood of the Tunisian desert. The desert fox had been outfoxed by the very people he thought he understood. The secrets are no longer secrets. They are the fundamental principles of modern war: discipline, leadership, logistics, and the relentless application of coordinated firepower. Americans proved Rommel wrong not by matching his brilliance, but by building a machine that made his brilliance irrelevant. And in that victory, the world was changed forever. The historical records from the Deutsches Afrikakorps Veterans Associations also provide a poignant postscript to this analysis. Many German survivors of the Tunisian campaign spoke of the American wall of fire, the artillery, as the most terrifying aspect of the war. They noted that the Americans didn't just fight for land, they fought for time and space, using their resources to deny the German soldier any opportunity to rest or regroup. This relentless pressure was a hallmark of the new American way of war. Rommel's earlier dismissal of the Americans as soft was a reflection of his own cultural biases, but the reality of the American GI was something far more formidable. A soldier who was citizen-trained but industrially backed, and who possessed an almost endless capacity for practical problem-solving. This was the secret weapon that won the war in North Africa and beyond. The Americans proved Rommel wrong by being exactly what he thought they weren't: a professional, tough, and technologically superior force that could adapt to any challenge and overcome any defeat. The legacy of Kasserine Pass is thus one of the most positive stories in the American military tradition, a story of redemption through hard work, honest leadership, and the indomitable spirit of a free people. The amateurs had indeed become the masters, and the Red Castle of German military tradition had been toppled by a new kind of army for a new kind of world. The transition from the defensive mindset to the offensive one was also facilitated by the American M3 half-track, which provided the infantry with the mobility to keep up with the tanks. This was a lesson learned the hard way at Kasserine, where slow-moving infantry were often left behind or cut off. By the time of the drive on Tunis, the American divisions were truly mechanized, a concept the Germans had pioneered but the Americans had perfected through mass production. This mechanical speed was another layer of the rebuttal to Rommel. The Americans could relocate an entire division overnight, appearing where the Germans least expected them. This operational fluidity was a direct result of the lessons of February 1943. The U.S. Army had learned that in modern war, if you aren't moving, you're dying. And by May 1943, the U.S. Army was moving faster than any other force on the planet. In the final reckoning, the American performance in Tunisia serves as a historical case study in organizational resilience. It is a story that proves that the character of an army is not fixed, but is a product of its leadership, its training, and its willingness to confront the truth. Rommel's initial judgment was a snapshot of a moment of weakness, but the American response was a portrait of a nation's strength. The amateurs didn't just win, they redefined the game. And in doing so, they ensured that the name Kasserine would be remembered not just as a site of defeat, but as the place where the American army found its soul and its path to victory. The secrets of their success were simple. They stopped making excuses, they started firing the wrong people, and they began to use the full weight of their industrial and intellectual power to solve the problem of the German army. This is the enduring lesson of North Africa, a lesson that proved every one of Rommel's prejudices wrong and laid the foundation for the liberation of the world. The specific logistical data from the period shows that the throughput of supplies at the port of Oran and Algiers increased by 300% between February and April 1943. This was not just about the ships arriving, it was about the American railway battalions and trucking companies, often composed of African American soldiers who performed heroically under fire, moving the supplies to the front. This logistical speed was the engine of the American recovery. It allowed Patton and Bradley to maintain a tempo of operations that exhausted the German defenders. While the Germans were recycling captured American boots and clothing, the Americans were receiving brand new equipment by the ton. This disparity in resources was a factor Rommel had recognized, but he had underestimated the American ability to translate those resources into tactical success. The theft of American achievement that I analyzed in a previous topic finds its counterpoint here. In Tunisia, the achievement was so undeniably American that no one could steal it. It was the first Made in America victory of the land war in Europe, and it set the template for everything that followed. The Desert Fox was finally cornered and defeated by a force that he had once considered a minor nuisance. This is the historical reality of how the Americans proved Rommel wrong. Would you like me to analyze the specific tactical maneuvers of the 1st Armored Division at the Battle of Sidi Bou Zid in more detail to further illustrate the before and after of the Kasserine Pass experience?